He was a 69-year-old man, well known and well liked by many in the Baton Rouge area. A therapist, counselor, and life coach. He was even a former priest, with countless families trusting him to guide their children through tough times. But his life came to a violent and tragic end when his body was discovered wrapped in a tarp along the side of a rural highway 2 parishes away. William Abraham, or Nick as most people called him, died a quote, very violent death. That's according to local authorities. The case has now captured national attention, unraveling over several days until the arrest of a surprising suspect, a TikTok influencer with millions of followers, Terryon Thomas, better known online as Mr. Prada. How did such a respected therapist end up on the side of a road? Did his checkered past have anything to do with his murder? The deeper you go, the more unsettling this story becomes. And we will navigate all the twists and turns this investigation has taken, shedding light on why it's drawn so much attention across the country. I'm Karen Chawla, and this is Louisiana Unfiltered. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this episode of Louisiana Unfiltered. I am joined by our executive producer, Daniel Brown. Daniel, let's just get right to it. This case, number one, it's garnered national attention, but it's such a bizarre case.
Yeah, it definitely went national pretty quickly. I think when you have TikTok star in the headline, and you have as many followers as he did on TikTok, it just became this, national sensation. He was known not only here in Louisiana, but suspect also known around the country. So I think that added a little bit of intensity to this. It definitely caught a lot of the crime blogs and crime TikTok accounts, with everything that was going on. They were all following it so closely that it just became one of those things that everyone began talking about.
And we've always said this in our entire journalism career that so many of the big stories somehow come back to Baton Rouge. And this, even here, same thing. This one started in Baton Rouge, but it goes all the way to the New York national television stations.
Yeah, and we get a nice little tour of South Louisiana in this one with all the developments in the case. And, it took a few days, but you're right. It wasn't long before New York and LA and some of the news outlets, across the pond got in on this story because it just became such a story that kept having twists and turns, and it kept developing, and there was so much intrigue into it.
Absolutely. And in fact, I guess let's break down for our listeners that how we even started reporting on this story. This came about as, hey, a body found in a remote area in Tangipahoa Parish. That's all we had.
Yeah, and sadly, Kieran, we get these all the time, so it doesn't really raise that much concern. We reported it, and then we kind of moved about our day, right? There was nothing remarkable about the first police report that came in on this. It was just someone driving by a rural part of Tangipahoa Parish, which is outside of New Orleans and Baton Rouge. It's a rural part of our area in the northern part, so kind of between like Hammond and the Mississippi state line there. Someone found a tarp that was a little suspicious. They called the sheriff's office, and it turned out there was a body in the tarp. And that's kind of how this all got started. It was just a body dumped on the side of the road. There was nothing, spectacular about this from the beginning. It was how this story developed that it became getting more and more interesting, because it wasn't long after sheriff's deputies in Tangipahoa found this body that we realized that it was a Baton Rouge therapist that had actually was killed.
Yep. And I just want to add to like where this body was found. It is such a remote area that on one
Hmm.
side of the roadway is woods, the other side of the roadway is railway tracks, and he was not in the ditch. He was right along the ditch and if you want to call it the median. But just like you said, Sunday, that happened on Sunday, that the Tangipahoa
Early Sunday
Sheriff's
morning,
Office
yeah.
Sunday morning, yes. The Tangipahoa Sheriff's Office puts out a release saying, hey, a body's been found. And like you said, unfortunately, that's not something that's uncommon for our viewership in our area. So we reported that, but it was Monday when everything just became such a bigger story when we realized that the person inside that tarp was William Abraham, also known as Nick to many people.
Yeah, he's a Baton Rouge therapist, a doctor. He was pretty well known in the Baton Rouge area. He was pretty well known in the LGBT community. He did a lot of work. A lot of his therapy sessions were dealing with LGBT youth and kind of helping them come, to terms with their identity. He has worked with a lot of substance abuse. So he had worked with a lot of different people in the Baton Rouge area who was really well known. His reputation was a little checkered. He didn't have a spotless reputation, which we're definitely going to dive into. But overall, he was someone who was really known in the area. Across between Baton Rouge and Tangipahoa, where this was, there were people that kind of knew him.
And in fact, let's just say this too, Daniel. We're all on social media. This was one of those stories that when you scroll on a personal page of Facebook, there were so many people who were sharing it saying, oh, I knew him, or oh, this one hurts. Because so many people knew him, he was very well known. Like you said, yes, unfortunately, a tad bit of a checkered past, but somebody not only well known, well liked as well. And then he also appeared on television stations around the area that kind of helped get his name and face out there even more to the community.
Yeah, he was definitely someone that I think it's safe to say was, he wanted to do good in the community. He really had a reputation for helping a lot of people. We talked to a few people who were patients of his, who were not identifying because of the sensitivity to what their relationship was and what they were talking about, the topics. And, they all said, like, he's someone that if you met, you would not forget him. A lot of people talked about how he saved their life. We even talked to one patient who says that not only did he save my life, he's also helping my kid come to terms with their own issues and problems. So it really was a kind of a family affair, if you will, with Dr. Abraham and his patients. And it was one after the other that we started talking to that there was a commonality there, right? They all kind of shared the same things. He was this big personality, this bigger than life kind of guy that everyone said that once you met him, you did not forget him, and he was always smiling. He had a wonderful voice. He always had a great attitude. A few people mentioned like a sparkle in his eye as well. So he was definitely someone that had that. But we also talk about the baggage, Kieran, and one of the things that we learned early on, and we waited a little while to kind of report because it was one of those things that was complicated to report, but it was in 2015 that he was accused of inappropriately touching an 11-year-old boy who he was helping out, in therapy, and he was accused of inappropriately touching the 11-year-old boy. It came out because the boy's grandmother noticed that her grandson was acting a little different, acting not himself. Took him to a different therapist, and that's where it kind of comes out, where the boy allegedly says that Dr. Abraham touched me. He had this story. The grandmother took it to police, and the case never really went very far. The Dr. Abraham was charged. He was charged March 2nd of 2015 for molestation of a juvenile. He had a $25,000 bond that he posted, and he was out of jail. And we're able, Kieran, a little behind the scenes, we can go into court documents and see past court documents. And a lot of the times you can kind of see court cases from like start to finish. This one was incomplete, right? We
There
knew
was
about
nothing
the
there.
allegations. there was nothing there. We knew about the allegations, we knew about the charges, we knew about the bond, and then the
And
case
that's
kind of
it.
disappeared. That was it. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and that alone, Daniel, kind of got us questioning, okay, it's been 9 years. I mean, that happened in March of 2015. In 9 years, the case should have gone through the judicial
Yep.
system. So, of course, we start asking questions. And I even spoke to the attorney for Nick Abraham, who was his attorney for this case back in 2015. He told me that the victim recanted his story. Of course, he also added that the victim made up the story. It was never true. The official response from the DA's office was that they simply could not get the victim to cooperate, and that's why the case never really went anywhere. The
Yeah,
truth
and I
is,
want to. I think let's read that quote that we got from the district attorney's office because I think
yes,
it's important to the case. And it was after considering all available evidence, the best interest of the child, and the lack of any statements by the arrestee, we declined to institute formal charges. There just wasn't enough, basically, there to put a case together. And I
exactly.
wanted to read that, Kieran, because that got a lot of people fired up here locally, about, these type of cases falling through the cracks, best interest of the child, what is the best interest of the child? That particular part of the statement that was given to us caught a lot of people off guard. But at the end of the day, the bottom line was there just was not enough evidence to move forward with a case here.
Exactly. And if you don't have the evidence, there's no way you can go to a trial or even offer up a plea deal. So at the end of the day, all charges are pretty much dropped. Nothing really happened with it. And then 9 years later, the name pops back up.
Yeah, and it pops up, and everyone now is an armchair detective. I like to say that Google makes it really easy to find old news stories and in old court cases. You don't have to have the system that we use to look up court cases. You can easily Google someone's name and find this out. So immediately, that's what a lot of people were starting to do, and they were like, "Why are you not reporting this? Why are you not reporting this?" And part of our job is to report the facts, but also report them in a way that's easy for people to understand. And we felt like we needed a day or two to kind of get that statement from the DA, fully explain the charges before we were kind of able to put that out. I
Yep.
only say that as a little behind the scenes of how we operate and how we kind of determine news. It's not as easy as just put it out there and report.
And I hate to say this, but the truth is there are so many people out there who think it's quick and easy to be a journalist, just throw it out there and it's go. And that's not ethically how you do it. So for us, I think I've always said this, it's not about being first, it's about being accurate and thorough. And I have to give props to our staff. Our staff really came together on this one and pieced every little part together, but we had a reason for doing the things that we did. So Daniel, let's go ahead and pick up from the top in chronological order. Let's first start at the apartment. This is the TikTok influencer's apartment.
Yeah, Terryon Thomas, his apartment. It was around 11 a.m. on September 28th. This is Saturday. Surveillance video shows Dr. Abraham arriving at the apartment. The apartment is located off Picardy in between Bluebonnet and Essen, so kind of the medical district in Baton Rouge. There's some apartment complexes right there. Some fairly new apartment complexes, if I'm correct in where this exactly is located. And surveillance video shows Abraham arriving at the apartment. And then that's where things are a little murky, Kieran. We know that there was a physical altercation that took place inside the apartment. We know that because as the investigation unfolded, police got a search warrant. They were able to search Thomas's apartment. They found blood. They found weapons. They found other evidence that they haven't yet disclosed that there was a violent altercation and that this is likely where Dr. Abraham died and was killed. So we know that it happened at Thomas's apartment.
And I think one of the other important things, and again, we're getting our information from court documents that was pulled on this specific case, but that it was around or still September the 28th, so the afternoon. Hours later, investigators say witnesses observed Thomas struggling as he dragged an object wrapped in a blue-colored tarp down the stairs of his apartment complex and loaded it into Abraham's vehicle, a 2018 black Lincoln MKZ. It's important, and that's why I'm telling you the type of a car. 2018 black Lincoln MKZ.
There's a few interesting details to note there, Kieran. One, the car, because that car is going to come back up. Also, the tarp, that blue tarp. Remember, he was found wrapped in that blue tarp on the side of the highway there in Tajapahoe Parish. So all these things are starting to kind of build the case. Investigators are starting to build their case with these with this evidence. And just to kind of set the scene a little bit for this apartment, so he was either on the second or third floor of the apartment complex. I think it was the second. So he was up high. The way it is, it's kind of like an open air apartment. So you have apartments on either side. You have an open air walkway, kind of like a hallway that leads to a stairwell. So, I want to point that out because all this is kind of happening that we're about to talk about in the open. It's
And in front of other people.
In front of other apartments, in front of other people. This was not done in secret, but essentially investigators say that after that struggle inside Thomas's apartment, Thomas is seen dragging that tarp out the apartment, down the stairs, and loading it in the back of Dr. Abraham's car. This is not like going from your door to your garage or anything like that. This is a pretty decent distance that you're dragging. And Dr. Abraham was a bigger guy. Thomas is very skinny. He's about 6 feet, but skinny. So this was quite a feat for him to drag this. It was a heavy load for him to drag it this far, and I just cannot stress this enough, Kieran. This was done like in an open air environment. This was not done in like a secret kind of environment.
Well, and maybe these are questions that we're never going to get the answers to, Daniel, but it begs to ask what happened inside that apartment. And maybe we will never know unless Thomas decides to speak, be it at his trial, be it when when detectives start questioning him. But we will not know whatever actually did happen inside that apartment that maybe caused all of this. But yeah, that's
Correct.
a very heavy load. Number one, to drag somebody out of your apartment. Who knows where they were in the apartment? In a bed, on the floor, or what? But first you got to get to the door. Then you're dragging all the way to the staircase, down the staircase. And then depending on how far your car is parked from the staircase, there's that distance as well. And all this is happening likely in the afternoon. So it's still daybreak outside, or it's still daylight outside, should I say.
Yeah, and on top of that, Kieran, we mentioned the tarp, but he was also, according to investigators, Dr. Abraham was wrapped in a comforter as well. So he was put in a comforter, then put in the tarp, and then it was kind of duct tape. And I think that's important too because it's even more. And there's a lot of unknown still here, right? We don't know why Abraham was at Thomas's apartment. We don't know how they knew each other. We also don't know exactly what time he was killed. Police are alleging that Thomas is the one that killed him because it happened at his apartment. But there's no video inside that apartment to kind of fully say that at this point. We're in the very beginning stages. And then we also have a time gap that we can't account for. We know he arrived around 11 a.m., but we haven't been given the exact times for when Thomas is seen carrying this blue tarp believed to be Abraham's body and putting him in the car. So there's still a lot of questions here, not only in the case, but in this specific part of the case.
And in fact, witnesses have even told deputies that they can't tell them what the time difference was between hearing an argument and then seeing him dragging this pretty much body covered in a tarp. So yes, a lot of unknowns, and I think I've said that from the very beginning on this case, that people have even asked, was Thomas maybe one of Dr. Thomas's clients? We don't know. Why was he at the house? Does he do house calls? We don't know, because it's a Saturday on top of that. So a lot of unknowns, but our goal is to report what we do know. I understand a lot of people are asking a lot of questions.
We are too.
The truth is, yeah, exactly. The truth is, some of those questions don't have answers. And it's not just us. I think there are deputies out there as well who don't have those answers.
Yeah, look, we were speculating like everyone else, behind the scenes among staff as well, just about what happened. Everyone speculates, but we still don't have a lot of those answers. The one thing that we both lived in apartments, and it's not uncommon to hear arguments or to hear things.
No.
you don't always report them. So that was something else that got brought up. If someone was murdered in this apartment, why didn't anyone hear or call or anything like that? But if you've ever lived in an apartment complex, there's always noises. Like, you can't always account for them, and the last thing you probably think is happening is someone's getting murdered at the apartment next door.
That's crazy to even think about because all of us, we've at some point in time in our lives probably lived in an apartment. So, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So that's Saturday, Daniel. Now let's move to Sunday, September the 29th. It's around 8:30 in the morning, and that is when this body is found, it was after deputies responded to the scene that they
Correct.
realized it was a body. It was initially called in as there's a suspicious item
Yeah.
located kind of near a ditch.
Yeah, suspicious tarp that was in this, like, kind of almost on the roadway, and we now know, is like we discussed as Dr. Abraham, we know that based on the video surveillance that he was wearing the same clothes as he was whenever he arrived at Thomas's apartment. So that verifies, according to investigators at least, that he was killed in that apartment. And again, it was, his head was covered in a dark towel. He had a lot of trauma. He was beaten really badly. We talked to the sheriff in Tangipahoa Parish, who basically said it was a very violent, very physical encounter. And it was very evident from the beginning when deputies arrived and saw that body. We don't know, because there's almost a 24-hour gap from arriving at Thomas's apartment to when the body was found. We don't exactly know when the body was dumped. We just know when it was located there in Tangipahoa Parish.
And Daniel, we have the show called Killing Fields. Louisiana, unfortunately, is often a dumping grounds for people to toss bodies. We've heard a lot of that happening in Iberville Parish, where there are a lot of swamps. This is also kind of a very remote area in Tangipahoa Parish. It's about 80 miles north of New Orleans, probably about an hour east of Baton Rouge, and kind of right between that Louisiana-Mississippi line. So this is a very remote area. And same thing, a body is dumped. We don't know exactly what time, but obviously sometime between Saturday afternoon and early Sunday morning.
And we know that Sunday afternoon, that Lincoln, that's why we said it was important to remember that car. Abraham's Lincoln car was spotted in Denham Springs. So, kind of between Baton Rouge and Hammond is Denham Springs. It's the Jubin Crossing Shopping Center. And Kieran, I know from your sources, you found out that Thomas stopped at the Academy Sports and Outdoors there in Jubin Crossing. And we know that because we later in the day got the person of interest in the case. The next day got the person of interest, where it's Thomas's photos from surveillance video at the Academy.
Yep.
Abraham's car was spotted in the parking lot of the Academy, and you see Thomas getting out of the car there. So we now know that sometime between Saturday and Sunday afternoon, that Abraham's body went from the back of the trunk. We got that from investigators, and now the car is spotted in Denham Springs.
Absolutely. And it just helps investigators kind of piece together Thomas's footprints as to where exactly he was. So Sunday, he's seen at Jubin Crossing at the Academy Sports Center leaving out. And I still, at this point, I don't think anyone thinks anything of it. It was the Bolo. What that means is be on the lookout for this 2018 Lincoln MKZ. So that is now gone into the system for any and all law enforcement to see. Well, that vehicle is spotted by a Baton Rouge police officer in, obviously, Baton Rouge on the next day. So now we are at Monday, September the 30th, around 12:20 in the afternoon. The car is
And mind
spotted.
you, we didn't know about the bolo. I know police knew about that bolo, but the media wasn't aware of that bolo
We had no
bulletin that
idea.
was put out about the car. So we didn't realize that this car was part of it. And I want to point that out, Karen. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I did want to point that out because it's important to know that the way the facts came out in this case were a little unusual compared to other cases that you've covered, that I've covered before. And this is one of them. Usually when there's a bolo for a case tied to a dead body, that's usually information that comes out pretty quickly.
Very
Investigators
quickly.
were holding this one close to their chest. So I did want to point that out before you continue.
Absolutely. And I honestly cannot remember why we chose to send our videographer to this specific scene because all we had was it was a police chase. And that's where the police chase ended. So we have police chases here all the time. But the police car notices
We were
this
getting a lot of
2000.
messages though, Kieran, if you remember, from people in that office complex.
That's what it
Our
was.
social media manager was on top of this and was looking at the messages. We were getting photos and videos from people at the apartment complex that something wasn't quite right here, and we didn't know. So when we sent Chase out to the scene, our videographer out to the scene, it was one of those things where we didn't really know what we were sending him out to, and it turns out we were kind
Agreed.
of the only ones there. So we got lucky by sending him, but we didn't really know what we were sending. We had no idea at the time that this was part of this investigation.
We honestly, I think, got lucky on that one because a lot of our viewership, they do. They ask us, hey, what's happening? Do you know what's happening at Sherwood and Coursey? A lot of the vehicles have been hit. And that's, so this is important to note. So the officer spots the car. The driver at this time is believed to be Thomas. He does not stop. The officer tries to make a traffic stop. Thomas keeps on going, and he ends up near Sherwood and Coursey. In this office area, he hits several of the cars that are parked as well as ramming into a police car before he bails. So he runs, officers lose him. And this is kind of where we come in the picture that not quite sure what's going on. Let's go ahead and get out there. There wasn't anything. The scene was actually cleared by the time our videographer even made it out there. It
And the
was
scene
much
was confusing too, Kieran, too, because
the
we had
trees.
we had these trees that were chopped up, and we had crime scene tape around the trees. We had this car that was on the back of a tow truck. It was a very confusing scene as well. So, a lot of this we haven't reported yet because those trees, we were going back and forth like, do these trees have anything to do with it? We don't believe the trees had anything to do with it, but they did have police caution tape around them. So that's just a little lanyard for everyone out there of kind of like what we deal with when we see scenes that
Oh yeah.
it takes us a little while to kind of put the pieces together a little bit. But Chase got the great picture, great video of this car on the back of the tow truck, and it clearly is Dr. Abraham's car. But Kieran, we still did not know it was Abraham's
We
car. We
did
still did
not.
not know
At
about
this
that
time,
Bolo bulletin.
nope, we knew none of this. We're just thinking, okay, we're going to go ahead and get this. In fact, I remember the conversations. We were so down to looking at the crime scene tape. At a crime scene, it'll say crime scene. This only said caution. So stay out of the area. And I remember you and I had the conversation of look at the trees. I don't think they look like they were run over. It looks like someone actually cut the tree. So we were so confused, but same thing. It goes back to why we delay our reporting. It's not about being first, it is about being accurate. And in this case, it was several hours later that we finally pieced it all together that, wait, Thomas was in that
Yeah.
car, and that is Abraham's actual vehicle.
And this is the snowball part of the investigation, Kieran. This is where the stuff is going to start coming fast and furious. This is where not only are police putting stuff out to the public, but we're also starting to connect some of these dots. So it was after that interaction with Baton Rouge police that we now are learning more. We're starting to get more information about the case. We know now that Thomas got a ride from that scene at Sherwood and Coursey back to his apartment. We don't know how he got it. We don't know if it was an Uber, if he had a friend bring him, if he got a cab, called a bus. We don't know. We just know that he somehow got a ride there. And then this is whenever information started getting released. Tangipahoa Parish Sheriff's Office, I mentioned those 4 surveillance photos of a person of interest in the case. Thomas was still not named, but we now have a face to put as a person of interest in this case.
And Daniel, I want to point out, so the Tangipahoa Sheriff's Office actually, they had these pictures, but they didn't know much about it. So after the crash, they go ahead and release these photos and say, we're asking for the public's help if you can help piece this together. 8:50, that email went out.
Yep.
9:30, they had him identified. Less than an hour.
They had him
And that's
identified.
probably because he's a TikTok influencer and 8 million followers. I mean, the TikTok world glued this piece together
Yeah.
in a matter of minutes.
And Kieran, I have no doubt that the TikTok people out there, the sleuths out there, were help in identifying this. But we also didn't know that as these pictures were being released, that they were already searching Thomas's apartment here in Baton Rouge. So that search was
Absolutely.
already kind of going on. So again, this is another piece in the case that's happening kudos to investigators because they don't. It's not often that these scenes or searches are kept as quiet as they were. In this case, no one really knew that this search was happening there in Baton Rouge.
Nope, and but it also kind of goes to show all the different agencies. So Tangipahoa Sheriff's Office, after they have now pieced together, hey, the pictures we released, the guy on Sunday, and the person who likely crashed this car is all going to be Terryon Thomas, who is now known as Mr. Prada on TikTok. They then get a search warrant for his apartment. That apartment is in Baton Rouge, in East Baton Rouge Parish. They go execute that warrant because remember, at this time, the body is still found in Tangipahoa Parish. They're the lead. However, because the apartment's in East Baton Rouge Parish, they go ahead and alert East Baton Rouge Sheriff's deputies that, hey, we're coming into your area if you want to join. So now you have both agencies going into the apartment. And again, Daniel, like you said, we as the media, we had no idea, but I guess you have to respect that in a way because when the case goes
Sure.
before trial, if every piece of evidence is out there, the district attorney's office is going to have a really hard time prosecuting that case.
Yeah, and it's further complicated, Kieran, because you have two sheriff's departments and a police department involved in this case, and they're two of them are in the same kind of area, but Tangipahoa is not close to Baton Rouge, so it adds a little more complexity to the case. And I do want to talk a little bit about Mr. Prada here. We haven't really gone into a lot of detail on him, but we mentioned he's a TikTok influencer, seems to be a trigger word for a lot of people, a TikTok star. I think there's a lot of debate over what term to use here, but no matter what you want to call him, he had millions of followers on this platform. He started in 2020, started gaining traction in about 2022, really picking up followers, picking up steam. He had a few different accounts over the years. We were able to find a few different accounts, but that Mr. Prada account, that his main account, if you will, 4 to 5 million people followed that account. So that's not a small number,
No.
even by today's standards of TikTok. But he became, kind of synonymous on the platform for a few reasons. One, he was very open on the platform. He, shaved his head and his eyebrows in some videos. He made some controversial posts about, posing for a mugshot, kind of foreshadowing, where we're going to be going in this case. It's not related to this case. It was done, far enough back. We don't think there's a connection, but still just these eerie posts that
Very.
he's making on the platform.
There were a lot of videos that I think we as a staff even watched, and we all said, that's odd. And then the mugshot image, or the post about the mugshot was just so strange. And then this comes out, and the next day is when we get a mugshot.
And he also
So
made some
now,
other posts too, Kieran, about, next time you're going to believe me, or this is what happens when you don't believe me, that type of stuff. So he was definitely vulnerable on the site. There was also some controversy about some of his posts. I was going down the rabbit hole about him, and one of the ways that he gained so many followers is he was really copying other creators on the platform, like the shot for shot, word for word, and that was controversial about him not being unique and original. And then after that controversy kind of slowed down a little bit is whenever he started posting some of these eerie posts that we're talking about here. So he was someone not afraid to be vulnerable on the site.
exactly. And that's probably what garnered him all those TikTok likes, followers, millions and millions of followers. And kind of like you said, it's not that easy to just pull that many followers in today's day and age when there are so many accounts out there
So
that we
many,
can
yeah.
all choose to follow. So let's move to October the 1st now. This is now Wednesday, I believe. No, I'm sorry. This is now Tuesday.
Tuesday.
The Baton Rouge Police Department now puts out a warrant. They have now pieced together who this person is as well, and that he was the one who bailed out of that car. They put out a warrant for him, and he is wanted for aggravated criminal damage to property, resisting an officer, and unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. So, in layman's term, what does that mean? Number one, you used the police, or you used your car, a car. That's the aggravated part of the charge, to damage several other vehicles. resisted an officer because you ran from them. And then the last one is unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. That is allegedly stealing Dr. Abraham's vehicle. That wasn't his
But
car.
notice what charge is not there though.
Murder.
We do not have a murder charge yet. So
Nope.
the Baton Rouge arrest warrant that's out there is for this person of interest in the case. They now have enough to issue an arrest warrant on some charges not directly tied to the murder, but tied to the case. So that's how now investigators are now starting to work more closely together. They're starting to piece together a lot more of the timeline publicly, and we're starting to kind of get a better idea of this. And Kieran, one thing that we learned, through WFAA TV in Dallas is he fled to Texas. He left Baton Rouge not long after arriving at his apartment after running from Baton Rouge police. And he fled for Texas, took a bus to Texas, is what they believe. And that's where he was arrested. He was on a park bench in downtown Dallas whenever he was arrested. A friend of his actually turned him in, knew where he was at, and called police. And he was arrested without any issues. There was no fight or anything, so he did not run from police that time. But now he's behind bars, and because Baton Rouge police had that arrest warrant on those charges related to Abraham's car, they're able to hold him there in Dallas, Texas.
Yep, and so the marshal's office picks him up there, and he's booked in Dallas as a fugitive for Baton Rouge police on those 3 charges. Very important to note at this time, murder is still not an option. He is a possible suspect in Dr. Abraham's case, but he is by no means at this point connected to the case. He could have been as far as law enforcement is concerned. As far as the media and the public is concerned, not yet. But one more time, I want to kind of recount Thomas's whereabouts. He goes from Baton Rouge on Saturday. Somewhere between Saturday and Sunday, he's 2 parishes over in Tangipahoa Parish. Sunday afternoon, yes, allegedly. Sunday afternoon, he's in Livingston Parish. For those who are not familiar, that is the parish in between East Baton Rouge and Tangipahoa. Monday, he's in Baton Rouge in Dr. Abraham's vehicle. The next day, he's in Texas, the next state over. So
He made
all
good time
this,
to get to Texas too.
he really did, huh?
Yeah.
So this whole time that everything that we as media and the public are not aware about is that a search warrant has been executed at Thomas's apartment. They find a good bit of blood. They find a lot of evidence that now goes to the state police crime lab. That is the reason that it was not put out to the public, because how do we know that blood is not an animal's blood or whatnot?
His
So
blood, Thomas's
all that
blood, yeah.
exactly. So the evidence all goes to the state police crime lab. I believe when they finally got that confirmation of, okay, we have enough to go on, at that point is when he officially was charged in Dr. Abraham's case.
Yeah, DNA evidence linking to Abraham's case. It was Abraham's blood that they found in the apartment, and like we said earlier, there were weapons and multiple sharp objects. So it makes you think that this was, and especially using, Kieran, what the sheriff in Tangipahoa said about how brutal this was, that maybe there were multiple things used in the killing. It wasn't just like one weapon. There could have been multiple weapons used. And we don't know that. We're using based on what we know was in the search warrant and what the sheriff in Tangipahoa Parish said, that it wasn't just like it was like a gunshot that killed him. This was a beating.
Absolutely. In fact, the autopsy on Dr. Abraham said blunt force injury, which means that you were pretty much beat to death. And I think you already said this, but even when they found his body, his head was wrapped in a towel. So we don't know exactly what happened inside that apartment complex. And again, as I've already said, we may never find out. So Thomas is now officially charged. Even though he's still in Dallas, he is now going to be charged, should I say at that point, with second-degree murder and obstruction of justice in connection to Dr. Abraham's case. So he's still in Dallas. Now at this point, and Daniel, this is kind of, I guess, explaining the system to our listeners, that you have to go before a judge and either waive extradition or you're going to fight it. What does that mean? That means I'm willing to go back to Louisiana. I'm not going to fight going back, or I'm going to fight it. In this case, he waived extradition. That means that's fine. Go ahead and take me back to Louisiana. And Monday, so October the 7th, he came back to East Baton Rouge Parish around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, where he was officially charged in Dr. Abraham's case.
And there's still, Kieran, so many questions. We laid out a lot of them, but we still, I think one of the big things that we're still waiting for is what was the relationships with Dr. Abraham? Was he a patient? Was he a someone he met like on a dating app? We don't know that specific connection yet, and I do think that that's going to be telling, because when you look at Thomas and Abraham next to each other, a lot of people have made this point in the comments. How does someone of Thomas's size take on someone of Abraham's size? Because there was a big difference in their sizes. And, I think knowing the relationship and knowing some of the background is going to give us some of those clues, because we talked to a lot of retired police investigators and a lot of retired investigators in general about this. And if it was a crime of passion, like we're assuming it is, we do not know, you can do incredible things. Your body can do incredible things in those times where it's almost like an outer body experience is the way that it was kind of described to us.
And Daniel, to kind of go off of that, the uncertainty remains as to exactly what did happen inside. No, we don't know the relationship between them, but we also don't know if perhaps, given that charge in 2015, the molestation of a juvenile, there are a lot of people out there who are questioning, was Thomas possibly being groomed by Dr. Abraham? We don't know. We've looked at the age difference. It's a 49-year age difference. One of the things that is very questionable is, let's say if he was making house calls, which is not unusual for a therapist, but on a Saturday? So again, a lot of unknowns. And until maybe Thomas starts talking, we won't know those answers. But then we've also dealt with, in our careers, Daniel, we've spoken to several people who have been abused. And it's terrifying for them to speak up, that they just prefer to keep quiet, that who's going to believe me? So that also is out there. There's so many questions on this case. There's so much intrigue in this case from the national, from the local. But the truth is, there is one person who knows what happened inside that apartment, and that is Terryon Thomas, or Mr. Prada. So now we go on to what's next. So the police and the sheriff's offices, they have finished as far as their investigation goes. Now begins the prosecution of this case. The case will now head to the district attorney, which is Hiller Moore in East Baton Rouge Parish, and he will start piecing together what happens next. Now, second-degree murder, he will probably have a bond. We don't know how much that is at this time, but he will probably have a bond, and he may actually be able to bond out. The other thing is that is still an unknown. We don't know if he's facing any separate charges in Tangipahoa Parish. As of right now, all Tangipahoa Parish has is that a body was found in our jurisdiction. I don't know if they have anything concrete that they're able to say Thomas dumped that body. If they are able to prove that, then there's a charge in Tangipahoa Parish as well. So still,
it would probably go along
a
with
lot
the
of
obstruction
unknowns.
of justice charges he's facing here in EBR, correct?
Absolutely.
It would be similar
Absolutely.
to that. And Kieran, I think what you said is spot on, because a lot of people think that this is an open and shut case, that Terryon allegedly killed Abraham, and it's like, all right, let's take him to prison. No need for a trial. But the truth is, because we don't know the reason, that further complicates the legalities of this case, because there's so many different defenses that you could have here, especially if this was a person who was allegedly abused by Abraham or something along those. That further complicates a clean, open and shut kind of case here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're going to continue to follow it. We've been following it on all platforms. We're going to continue following it. We just wanted to kind of bring you the breakdown of this case, and also how we handled our reporting and why we did things the way we did. But make sure you continue to follow us on Unfiltered with Kieran. That's where we have all of our updates as well. And as always, we thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next episode of Louisiana Unfiltered.